This is Craig Brown, and welcome to Passages. Passages is a space to explore Bible passages used for preaching, reflection, and prayer. My hope is that Passages will shine a unique light on text used for preaching at the First Free Methodist Church of Seattle, or anyone looking to dive deeper into the Bible. Today's passage is Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. It's the basis for the sermon at the First Free Methodist Church on Sunday, August 2nd, 2026. It's part of our series called Faith Forward. So let's hear the passage beginning in Exodus 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and gave birth to a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got him a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Now his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her female attendants walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave woman, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a woman for you who is nursing from the Hebrew women, so that she might nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." This is a rich story that's been told many, many times to children, to adults. Of course, fantastic movies have been made about it. But let's just tend to the story itself as it's recorded in Exodus. So a little bit of background to this story. When the book of Genesis ends, which is the book right before this, we find Joseph and his brothers all in Egypt. And between Genesis and Exodus, we find that 400 years have passed. And the nation of Israel, Joseph and his brothers, has grown to a point where they're understood as a threat to the Egyptians. It says in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, "Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. The Pharaoh, the king, enslaved the Israelites to do the work of building a lot of Egyptian infrastructure. And the hard work did nothing to shrink the Israelite population. They continued to multiply. At one point, the Pharaoh called all of the Hebrew midwives before him and gave them orders to put all male children to death upon their birth. Now, Pharaoh took note that male children were living. He would see babies who were male. And he called those midwives back before him and he asked why. And their response to him is so important. They told the Pharaoh that the Hebrew women are, quote, vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get there. Now, this statement of the midwives functions as kind of the soul of the story of the birth of Moses. What the midwives say about the Hebrew women is critical for us to hear the story that is to follow, because we're going to see how 3 different women all display a degree of defiance, shrewdness, and cunning for Moses' sake. So Pharaoh then told all of his people, once this plan with the midwives had failed, to take any male child born to the Hebrews and throw them into the Nile River. This was the Pharaoh's effort at population control. It's about his, regal and male dominance and insecurity, as opposed to the story we're about to hear of some of these powerful women in the book of Exodus. And that opens the first key passageway to us, and it's this: that God's purposes are always working in and through human choices. God's purposes are always working in and through human choices. A key to reading the entire Exodus story is remembering this theological truth. Rather than see these events that unfold in Exodus as part of the sovereign ordained will of God, I'd encourage us to see them a little bit more relationally. Humans and God are woven into a dance of choice, of will, of grace. God is going to save his people in Egypt from slavery. How that happens is really up to the choices that Pharaoh is going to make. And God certainly makes his choices. And this is important. It's not just speculation. I mean, imagine, if you will, for a moment, had Pharaoh been obedient to the Lord, how would this story have taken shape? See, the Lord moves in a dynamic of people's choices. God is persistent. God is engaged, relating. So we should seek God's purpose in our lives with every choice we make. And God's every choice, though, is to work in and among us. He is faithful, even when we are not. We turn now to the story of these women of faith in verses 1 through 4. Now, the story in chapter 2 opens with an interesting play on names. We hear in verse 1 of a Levite marrying a Levite. Now, the Levites will eventually become the priestly and spiritual leaders of Israel. But for now, I just want you to note that there are no names listed here. Now, we're going to learn later in the Exodus story that their names are Jochebed and Amram. So throughout the story that we're going to read in Genesis 2, Moses' parents are not named. His brother, his older brother, is not even in the story. His name is Aaron. His sister is not named. We know her later to be Miriam. Pharaoh's daughter isn't even named. Only Moses has a name, and at that, we don't even learn it until the end of the story. So our narrative features baby Moses, but more importantly, 3 women who are the heroes of our story. Now, the text tells us that this Levite woman gave birth to a son, and it says that she saw that he was beautiful. Now, this translation is helpful, not helpful. It's the very same Hebrew word that's used in the Genesis creation story when we read about the 6 days of creation. And at the end of each day, God said that it was good, and got to the end of the 6th day and said it was very good. That Hebrew word for very good, same word here. So she saw that he was literally very good. Now, the mother here, who we learn her name, of course, later, Jochebed, hid him for 3 months. And that's easier to do with a small infant. So in their home or wherever they live, she was able to hide him in a way so that the Egyptians were not alerted to him being there. So she kept him in the home, hid him from Pharaoh's order to have him cast into the Nile River. I mean, Pharaoh's intent is that all the male children who are born get thrown into the river and are drowned. So instead of having the midwives in charge of this, Pharaoh, of course, probably puts his soldiers in charge of this. But then here's where the cunning action begins to unfold. Remember the command of Pharaoh. All the male children are going to be thrown into the Nile. And Moses' mother does exactly that. She puts him in the Nile, but she makes a box. Now, it's often translated basket, but it's a box, and it's an important word. This box for the child that we talk about here is the same word that's used to describe the ark that Noah makes. It's the same word that's used to describe the Ark of the Covenant. And so Moses, in the story that's told in Genesis and Exodus, as these 2 stories kind of are bound together, that this theme of the box or the ark is important. It's what Noah made, it's what Moses is placed in, and it's what the covenant of God, the tablets, will be placed in later in the Exodus story. So Moses' mother follows Pharaoh's command to the letter. She put him in the Nile, but she put him in a box in the Nile to hold the child. Now, what happens here is often misunderstood. She has no intention of giving up the child. Her decision to place him in the box in the Nile is the fact that she can't keep him quiet in the house anymore. She simply chooses to now hide him in the reeds of the Nile in a box. And it totally makes sense. All the male children are being thrown into the Nile, so it's a perfect place to hide the child. The notion that she somehow sets Moses afloat in the Nile, trusting that someone will find him, that she gives up her child, and just whatever happens to him happens as he floats down the river, is not at all what the text says. This is about Moses' mother trying to hide him, conceal him, and puts him in the reeds. Putting him in the reeds means that the box is not going to move. It's kind of stuck in between all the reeds that are there. It's not just freely afloat in the middle of the river. And then here's where another character enters this story. So we have Moses' mother, and now enter woman number 2. This is Moses' sister, who is unnamed here, but we're later going to learn that her name, of course, is Miriam. Verse 4 tells us that she stood at a distance to watch what would happen to him. So she's basically on a stakeout. She's there to make sure that Moses stays exactly where he's been placed by his mother. And so the intent is that the mother is going to go out there at different times to either nurse him or watch over him. It was better for Moses to be in that condition than to be pitched into the river and to drown. So it doesn't sound like a very good way to hide a child, but it's the best that she can do at this point, and it's the best cover that she can get. So Miriam is on guard duty. She's watching over Moses afloat in the reeds. So what this tells us is that the whole family is in on the plan. Keep Moses in the reeds, nurse him as needed, and keep hiding him. And that opens up a key passageway for us, and it's an unusual one, and it's this, that shrewdness is not deception, but a pathway to faithfulness. Now, we hear several stories of Jesus in the gospel about the shrewdness of servants. You might remember the parable of the talents or the parable of unrighteous mammon in Luke's gospel. These are all stories about being shrewd, about being careful, about being thoughtful. And so this is the story of the same kind of shrewdness that, to be honest, in the story that we've been reading from Genesis through Exodus, it's the kind of shrewdness that even Jacob himself would have approved. No matter the circumstance, the struggle, the pain, we also must look for ways to be faithful to God. You see, defiance can take many forms. It doesn't always need to be in public protest. Sometimes it looks like quiet, confident, and keen choices to follow God faithfully. Jochebed can see Moses' peculiar calling. Remember, the text says that she saw that he was beautiful or very good. So she goes to every length possible to try to support it. She obeys the letter of Pharaoh's command, but certainly not its spirit. What she does, with the help of her family, is an amazing act of faith in God's purpose and call. As we look at verses 5 to 10, we now see a story of women of courage. Now, something happens which is unforeseen. But again, the choices that these 3 women in the story matter the most. So we've met Moses' mother, Jochebed. We've met his sister, Miriam. Now enter woman number 3. Verse 5 tells us about how the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, and her female attendants are walking with her along the Nile. As they're walking along, the daughter of the Pharaoh sees the box in the reeds where Jochebed has placed Moses. And when she sees the box trapped among the reeds, which is exactly what Jochebed wanted, the daughter then sent her servants to retrieve the box, and they found Moses inside. And it's here where her human compassion kicks in. The daughter of Pharaoh sees the child crying, and it says in the text that she has pity on him. She knows immediately that it is a Hebrew child, and that according to the edict of her father, he should be thrown into the Nile and put to death by drowning. But she, just like Jochebed, just like Miriam, acts in defiance. And in this case, she acts in defiance of her own father. It's much more direct, but no less effective. Moses' sister then sees this unforeseen event happen. So she sees that Pharaoh's daughter has found Moses in the reeds, which wasn't necessarily anyone's intent. And so when it happens, she moves quickly. She's shrewd. She goes quickly and asks the daughter of Pharaoh if one of the women who is, listen to how she says it in the story, who is already nursing should be called to help. This helps us understand that Jochebed had no intention necessarily of giving Moses up. So Pharaoh's daughter hears the idea from Miriam and says, well, go and get such a woman. So, of course, who does she go get? Miriam goes and gets her own mother, Jochebed. Now, notice in the story that Jochebed's husband, Amram, completely disappears from the story. Now, his name is mentioned later, but there's nothing said about him other than in verse 1 where it says he married a Levite woman. That's it. There's no action on his part. This story is about women. So not only does Jochebed end up nursing Moses, her own son, but as we learn in Exodus 2, the Pharaoh's daughter actually pays her to do so. It's one of so many layers of irony in this story at work. Pharaoh means to kill him. Now, Jochebed is being paid to save and to nurse him, the very person who will bring down Pharaoh himself. So eventually, Moses grows past the age of being thrown into the Nile. And, perhaps, this is the whole point that Pharaoh's daughter is in on it, trying to conceal the child until he's old enough to be too old to be pitched into the Nile and murdered. So eventually, at the appropriate time, Jochebed brings Moses to the Pharaoh's daughter. And the Pharaoh's daughter makes him her son. It's the best way to say in Hebrew that he was adopted. Remember, in Hebrew, there is no word for adoption. So it says she makes him her son is the best way to translate this. So now Moses is basically adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter in the Pharaoh's household. So not only is Moses saved by these three women, he's now going to be raised as a prince and a leader in Egypt. And then it says she names him Moses. This is the first time we see a name in the story. Now, the name Moses is not a Hebrew name. It is a Hebrew transliteration of his name in Hebrew. His name in Egyptian. So he's basically given an Egyptian name, and then if you took that name out of Egyptian and transliterated it into Hebrew, it would be Moses. It literally means the son who comes forth. So and it's usually in Egyptian in reference to being born, but it's true to his purpose. Not only does Moses come forth from the water, but he will bring the sons of Israel forth from Egypt itself. This story is a beautiful story of the courage of these three women in their cunning and shrewd defiance of the Pharaoh. And that opens our last key passageway. True faith adapts and improvises while staying true to God. True faith adapts and improvises while staying true to God. You see, faith, by its nature, is tested by shifting and changing circumstances. Jochebed and Miriam have no idea that Moses will be discovered. I mean, they knew it was a risk, but that he would be discovered by Pharaoh's daughter. The story here shows great faith and courage. As soon as Moses is discovered, Miriam intervenes and points to Jochebed, his mother, to be his nursemaid. Jochebed willingly gives up Moses once he's older to Pharaoh's daughter. And it's just such a powerful story that helps us understand that when we encounter trials and struggles and surprises, we should remember the story of these three women and how quickly they moved and worked to preserve the purposes of God. They adapt, They stayed focused, they remained defiant, and God forms a deep faith in this story. I want to thank you for listening to the FFMC podcast. Listen in for our sermon podcast and our conversational podcast called Connections. You can find them all right here in the FFMC podcast. I also encourage you to visit our church's website at ffmc.org to learn more about Free Methodism and how you can connect with our community. For now, I bid you all grace. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.